I can recall being a fourth year student and wondering what the heck I was going to do next. It was around this time, and I knew that I only had a few months left of my undergraduate degree. And so I was thinking a lot about what was going to be my next step, because I did look at the LSAT practice test early in my undergraduate career and realized law school was not going to be for me. But I had a feeling I wanted to do something more, that my studies weren't quite done. So I appreciate the feelings that you all might be having now. First, though, you see a couple other faces on our webinar. You might see a couple other faces on our webinar. You might not. Maybe you only see me. But I do want to, I've brought kind of a crew of people to help me with this webinar and to help answer questions that you might have. So I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Susan Roy. Susan is an associate professor in the Department of History, and she's also the graduate chair in the Department of History. So thank you, Susan, for being part of this. We also have a couple of students with us, which is the best part of my job, actually, is working with our students. So I'm very pleased to introduce Erica Swires. Erica is a PhD student in Germanic and Slavic Studies, but she also did her MA here at the University of Waterloo. Erica has actually just finished a rigorous weekend of writing a lot of papers that she needs for her field exams for her PhD. So thank you, Erica, for being here. And we also have Ethan Myers. Ethan is a student, a PhD candidate in psychology. And Ethan, I hope I'm not wrong, but you did your undergraduate degree at Waterloo, decided it was amazing, and continued on to do your MA and then your doctoral studies in the Department of Psychology at the University of Waterloo. So
you got it perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. Great. Thanks, Ethan, for being here also. And of course, I also want to thank my partner, Maha Eid. So Maha's doing the sort of trying to answer quick questions that might come up in the chat. Maha is our faculty coordinator, graduate coordinator. So she handles and is responsible for all kinds of stuff that goes on in graduate studies. And she's an excellent partner to me. So Maha, thank you for taking time on your day off to be here with us this morning. I really appreciate it. Okay, so let's begin with a few things that you want to think about. First of all, I want you to think about whether or not grad school is right for you. So for some of you, this is the logical next step. You've probably done well in your undergrad. You might have a burning research question that you want to study more intensely. You have a couple of professors that you'd like to work with more closely. You want to deepen your learning. You want to contribute some of your own research to your discipline. And graduate school is just, it's a no-brainer. That's exactly what you want to do. And you're absolutely intent on applying, which is fabulous. For others of you, it might be more the way I was at the time, where I really enjoyed school, but I wasn't sure whether or not getting into the workforce was the next step. And so you start to just look into what are other possibilities. Could I extend my education a little bit longer? And since, for me anyway, most master's programs were only a year long, I would think to myself, you know, another year, another degree, that seems like that could be a really good idea for me. Graduate studies, I think, can be really exciting. Again, if it's things like you want to achieve doing your own independent research at a bit of a deeper level, if you want to catalyze some of your ideas that you have that you've learned from your undergrad, it's a great place to go and a great thing to consider. Depending on what kind of degree you want to do, it can also be expensive. So you want to think about, what is another year of post-secondary education going to mean for me financially also? So these are all things that you want to think about when you're considering grad school, including things like, what are my career goals? Is this something that will actually get me further along in the career goal that I have? And I think the great thing about considering these things is that you'll find out, you'll have lots of people to talk to and get their opinion and get their feedback. And we, of course, are going to encourage you to do that, to do some reach out and really talk about if this is something that you think would be good for you. Now, there are different types of graduate programs. So you have professional programs that you can consider, and you've got research-based graduate programs. I'm going to talk first about some professional programs. So if you are someone who is thinking a little more career oriented, you have an idea of exactly where you want to go, but you want a bit of a leg up in order to get into that career. Or you might be somebody who's attending this webinar who finished their undergrad degree a couple of years ago. You might already be in a job, but you're realizing that a master's degree, like a graduate degree, is actually kind of what you need to move up in your career. So for a number of students, professional programs, a professional graduate degree is the perfect choice for them. We have about, I guess we have 5 professional programs in the Faculty of Arts at the University of Waterloo. So for example, we have we have a program called the Master of Public Service. So if you are a student who's looking to get into any level of government, to be a public servant or a bureaucrat, we have a program, a professional program that you can attend where there is an 8-month co-op that you do that often bridges into full-time positions in the public service. We also have a Master of Accountancy. So if you're someone who's in doing their MF or their Bachelor of Accounting right now, that's a program you can consider. It's a bit of a fast track for the Chartered Accountants designation, or maybe you've done your global digital arts degree, your undergrad in global digital arts and business, and you're thinking maybe the Master of Digital Experience Innovation is something for you. So those are all professional programs, much more geared towards careers. Usually professional programs are about a year long. Sometimes they can go, if you've got an internship or a co-op option, they can go a little bit longer. You tend to do more courses in a professional program than in a research-based master's. You might be asked to do some kind of a research paper or a team project. And as I said, there could be co-op, there could be an internship, but with professional programs, you will be paying a higher fee. So they do charge more in tuition because they are considered professional. So it's a little bit of a higher cost for the student. But many who go through them end up, doing fairly well in the marketplace afterwards. I expect, though, most of you are probably interested in a research-based master's degree. So these are sometimes called thesis-based because you do a bigger chunk of your own writing. Often research-based masters are 1 year long, but some can go up to 2 years. You do approximately 4 to 6 courses in a research-based master's degree, and you must complete either a major research project called an MRP or a thesis. So I think in economics, there are a couple of masters where it's just courses, but they're still research-based, but most of the programs, the graduate programs that we offer in the Faculty of Arts that are research-based involve a component that's either a thesis or a master's research paper. And this is because you are demonstrating that as a junior scholar, you're able to tackle a particular research question and investigate it at a much deeper level and a more analytical level than you have done before in your undergraduate program. Often if you're doing a master's thesis, it involves a defense. So for some programs, you defend your proposal. So you get that experience of having people ask you questions about what you're doing and suggesting other ways that you might be able to think about it, but you have to defend what you're doing. And at the end, when you've written a thesis, you also do an examination, an oral examination of your thesis, where you have 2 or 3 members of your department, perhaps someone from outside your department, who kind of interrogate what it is that you have done in that particular program. And it sounds scary, but it's usually not that scary. And when you're done, you have achieved your own piece of work that you've contributed to your discipline. And that is that's a really neat feeling to have. With research-based master's programs, we actually guarantee funding for the student in order to assist them with their education. So if you are a research-based master's student, you've applied and you've been accepted, we offer you a funding package to help you. So starting in fall 2022, most master's students will be offered $18,000 that will help them with their program. From that, you are usually a teaching assistant. So the $18,000, you get a teaching assistant as part of that. You might work as a research assistant, and some of it is just some scholarship money for you. But we do provide a guaranteed funding package to assist you. It won't pay for everything that you might need for that year, but at least it's better probably than what you've received in your undergrad in terms of any kind of guaranteed funding, which I assume is almost nothing. So I guess I covered this a little bit already when I talked about the thesis, but just to be clear, if this is an option that you want to go through, MA theses are usually about 100 pages in length, which again seems kind of daunting, but by the time you break it all down chapter by chapter, you can chunk it up and it's not actually as difficult as it might seem. A master's research paper is shorter, usually between 50 and 60 pages. But if you happen to be in doctoral studies, I think most of you are probably third year or fourth year considering this. If you're in doctoral studies, as both Ethan and Erica are doing right now, you write an original research paper that usually spans between 200 to over 400 pages, depending on your discipline. Yeah, and I'll jump just to the bottom point there. For both your MRP and your thesis, you are working closely with a faculty member, sometimes two faculty members who are your supervisors. So they are the people who are overseeing your project, who are giving you advice, who are suggesting literature that you can read, and they will help guide you through that whole process. All right, I'm going to right now turn it over to Erica, who's going to talk to you a little bit about finding a program in graduate studies that is right for you.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, so it might almost seem like an obvious choice which program you're going to go into. You know, if you're studying in one particular discipline right now in your undergrad, the next obvious step might be to go into the exact same field. But I think in terms of finding a program, it's really important to consider what the options actually are. So as Anna mentioned, there are a number of professional programs here at the University of Waterloo, many of which I know at least some of them are non-consecutive, which means that your undergrad actually doesn't need to be exactly in the same topic as the master's. And also, you know, sometimes you might have focused on a particular area of research in your undergrad, which actually aligns a little bit better with a different discipline. I know in my department, I'm from the Department of Germanic and Slavic Studies. Some of my colleagues studied, for example, history in their undergrads, but then joined our department for their master's. So if there are kind of adjacent fields that match what your interests are, what your research interests are, and also a little bit of, you know, at least the experience that you've got from your undergraduate degree, then make sure you check out those programs. The department website of the academic department and for the program specifically have a lot of information. So make sure you check those out. Check out what grad students are doing, what the faculty are working on. And that's a good way to find out if, you know, what you're interested in studying is something that is actually happening in that program. Sometimes you read the program description, you have a certain idea of what that means. And then once you get into the program, it might mean something different. So that's definitely one way to find out a little bit more. And you can just go over to the next slide there. I think Anna's just controlling them. Thank you. So yeah, I'll just leave this slide up for a moment just to kind of give you a chance to look at the different programs that are out there. I believe the orange ones are the professional programs, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So these would be the ones, like Anna was saying, are structured a little bit differently. Otherwise, you can see that a lot of programs have an MA or also a PhD program. So if that's something that you're considering as well, you can usually find out information about all those programs on the department website. Okay, yeah. So how to find out what a program is like. It's definitely a little bit nerve-wracking looking at a program online and thinking about applying and kind of trying to picture yourself as part of that program. And if you're anything like me, you're going to try to find out every single possible bit of information as you can about the program before and during your application. So like I said, make sure you check out that program website. It usually contains all the information that you need, all the deadlines and everything like that. You might still have questions, and then it's a really good idea to get in touch with the people from the department. There are a lot of people from the academic departments that can help you out, not just the professors, but also, for example, the program coordinators, maybe the administrative staff. They usually have a lot of information about the structure of the programs and deadlines, funding, requirements for applying and all that kind of thing. So if you've got kind of questions about the program itself, I think asking the admission staff is probably the best way to go. Another thing you can do is try to get in touch with some current grad students. I personally have been in touch with lots of incoming graduate students, people who are thinking about applying and just want to know what our programs are like. If you're not sure how to get in touch with them, one place to start is to look at the website. Sometimes there are grad profiles there that might give you a bit of an idea of who you want to contact. Their contact information might not be posted, but if that's the case, you can usually just contact the program coordinator. Or another really great person to ask is your grad coordinator, your grad chair. I believe Anna is going to talk about that on the next slide, but this is a really good person to talk to. They are responsible for kind of running the grad programs and can definitely point you in the right direction when it comes to talking to students or finding out whatever information it is that you're looking for. So yeah, basically check out the website and talk to as many people as you can. Don't be afraid to reach out. Most people are really happy to talk about their programs. So I would definitely encourage you to talk to people before you apply.
Great. Thanks, Erica. Yeah, and just following up on Erica's point, many of you are undergrad students here at the University of Waterloo. And so you've probably already interacted with your associate chair undergraduate studies in your major. So when you have there's a faculty member who's responsible for giving you advice about your courses, about maybe taking on a minor, about specializations. And then you also have an undergraduate coordinator that you may have talked to about your schedule and this sort of thing. So we have the exact same thing at the graduate level. So for every department, we have a professor who is the graduate chair for that program. And we also have a staff person who's the graduate coordinator, who also gives advice and talks to students and are so happy to talk to you about any questions that you might have. So both of those people are in each of those programs to support you and to answer any questions you have. And once you start in the program and other things are going on and you need advice, those are the two people that you can talk to. So for graduate chairs in the department, we've put together a list here. Notably, especially when it comes to professors, these roles can change. People take them on for 2 or 3 years at a time, and then somebody else in the department takes on that particular role. And then we also have graduate coordinators in each of those positions also. I've not done a list of all the grad coordinators here, but again, easily identifiable on the program's website, and you can email them, reach out to them at any point, and they would be happy to talk to you about that program specifically and any questions that you might have. Okay, so when we start, if you've made the decision, I think I want to go to graduate school, I think I want to do either a professional program or a research-based program, you might want to also think about what is it that grad schools want? What do these programs want? Now, as you'll note for the different criteria or the eligibility or the selection for students, obviously, most programs are looking for students who are academically inclined. So most programs will have a minimum GPA that you must have achieved in order to be considered for that particular program. In most cases, and I can be corrected, programs are particularly interested in your grades from third year and fourth year, because let's face it, first year is not always a hit it out of the ballpark kind of year for most of us. And I can say again, I thought, Ethan, smart guy in psychology, I thought I wanted to be in psychology. And in first year, I took psychology and I got a C. And I was like, that's okay. I took psychology a second year, also got a C. And at that point, I kind of tuned in, maybe psychology is not for me. And so I decided to pursue my other love, which was political science. So we know that first year and second year, some students are finding their feet, and they're kind of what we're looking for is an upward trajectory. So grades are important because they do reflect your ability to think critically, to potentially be meeting deadlines, to being able to fill out all the requirements of a course. And grad studies is rigorous, and we want the students who hopefully will be able or at the point to manage the added responsibilities that come from graduate school. Programs are also looking to see your understanding of the field and your understanding of what you're going to be doing in that program. So this, and I think Ethan will talk a little bit more about this, your personal statement or your statement of intent is an important document that you hand in with your application. Programs want to know, like, how serious are you? Do you have a research question? If it's a research-based program, do you have a research question that you want to pursue? Have you thought about it yet? Do you have an idea of how you're going to go about investigating it? You're never necessarily wedded to that particular question, but programs want to see that you can actually think in a scholarly way, that you've developed a question that you want to pursue. Certainly I've looked at applications, in my own department, or students have handed me, can you look over my personal statement or my statement of interest? And sometimes it's things like, I love politics. I love studying politics. I think politics is going to help us solve the world's problems. And I would really like the opportunity to study politics more in graduate school. And this is the kind of thing where we really want students to be able to say something like, I am interested in studying why Justin Trudeau was able to win the 2021 election, right? They have a clear question. So programs do want to have that know that you have an understanding of the field and you've got a particular idea that you really want to concentrate on when you're actually in the program. Programs are also looking for students that have some well-roundedness. Do you volunteer? Are you involved in extracurriculars? Do you participate in school sports? Like, what are other things that are interesting to you that you've been able to bring into your life and demonstrate that you've got, a sense of community also. And then for some particular programs, it might be looking for, have you actually done, are there prerequisite things that you needed to have done, and have those all been ticked off in advance. So since I've kind of started into what they want, I'm going to turn it over to Ethan to talk about what you then might need as part of an application process.
Yes, wonderful. So I hope that the main takeaway from this slide is that you recognize that there are many possible elements of an application that any given program might request. But the key is that very few programs do it similarly to any others. That is, the requirements for any given program are usually different from any other program you might want to apply to. So when you are applying to graduate schools and you are applying to programs that you might want to be a part of, be sure to pay careful attention to their websites, wherever they list exactly what they need to be part of their application, because your experience will vary and their expectations will vary. Of the traditional elements you might need to apply to graduate school, a fairly standard one will be the application form. This typically just includes presenting very basic information about yourself that the school needs for administrative purposes, but it might contain other elements that are actually even listed on this page, and I'll mention that when I get to them. You will almost always be required to present your official transcripts from your undergraduate institution or undergraduate institutions if you attended several. Sometimes you will be required to submit what might be considered an admissions test. This could be things like the GRE, the GMAT. In the case of legal law, you would need an LSAT. And typically these are what are used. So I said there was a question in the question and answer, so I'll also touch on that here, which is these sorts of tests are usually used to compare students across schools because it is often difficult to compare marks from one institution to another, especially if they're on different grading scales. Like McMaster uses a 1 to 12 scale, I believe. And we, of course, use the 0 to 100 here. So it's often very difficult for institutions to directly compare students. So they use metrics like the graduate record exam to be able to afford them some ability to make the comparisons across students. Be very careful with which sort of admissions test the program might be asking you to submit. The GRE, the general GRE, is quite common among most programs. Some programs, however, might have waived this requirement, especially over the pandemic. Others might want subject-specific GREs. So do be very careful in paying careful attention, I suppose, to this particular detail as to which tests that they may want. You will also be expected to present your resume or more likely a CV. So this, in addition to say your transcripts, will ideally help to present sort of what you've been doing with your time over the last few years, or what are the sort of things that you've done and potentially accomplished. And you might sort of expand upon some of those particular things contained in your CV or your transcripts in your letter of intent. This letter of intent is typically very important. Oftentimes it will encompass a writing sample, sometimes even like a small language test for the people who are reading it, and also even ask you to list who your potential supervisor might be, and we'll get to that point. But a letter of intent is really about sort of communicating about yourself and your interests in graduate school and perhaps in the particular work that you are interested in doing. So do pay a lot of attention to a letter of intent, spend a lot of time writing it, revising it, asking for feedback even from potential referees that you have. If you give them enough notice, they might be able to help you shape a better letter of intent, and also try to personalize this as much as you can to each program that you are applying to. Because here you'll want to really communicate things about you, say your passion for the work, your burning questions that you may have for the field, to your potential supervisor, to whoever is making the hiring or the decisions to admit you to graduate school. You would like this letter of intent to be something that communicates exactly who you are and what you wanted at this program, what you were looking for in a graduate experience. So that letter is going to be a very key piece that is often neglected, or students don't tend to spend as much time perhaps as they should on this letter, because it often represents one of the few ways that you can truly communicate to whoever it is that you are applying to. But you should, of course, seek other ways to try to establish contact before then as well. So you might ask to be provided a writing sample, or ask to answer some short questions, typically a paragraph or two in length. These might naturally find themselves as part of the application form. You might be essentially asked to do this as part of your letter intent. So be careful as to what they might sort of specify for that. It's not always a requirement. Typically, there will be written portions of your overall application, and this might cover it for a school, but alternatively, they might like to see a demonstration of your ability to write in a professional academic manner. You might be asked to provide a language test, especially if you are an international student applying. In my personal experience, this was quite rare to see, but I have seen it as a requirement. So do check if that's sort of required, especially if you're an international student applying abroad. You will ask to be provided 3 letters of reference, usually, sometimes 2. And these should come from supervisors, and I'll touch on the next slide as to how you might go about this and who you might ask to provide a reference. And you might also be asked to specify who you are intending to work with when you apply to the graduate program. Some programs work a little different in that they're sort of supervised by all of the professors in the area. That happens frequently in psychology, where I'm from, but also often you are working one-on-one with an individual supervisor. Your intention is to apply directly to them, and usually in your letter of intent there should be a bit of space dedicated towards saying who you want to work with and why. Particularly, are they doing interesting recent work that you would like to work with them for? Do you have sort of a question about their work that you would like to explore with them? These are sorts of details that you might want to include right at the end of your letter. So I think we're good to move to the next slide, which is on choosing your references. So this is quite an important point to preparing your application for graduate school, and something you should do quite early on is be thinking about whom you might ask to be your reference for a graduate program. And it might seem like a bit of obvious advice, but you really need to look for someone who knows you well, or as well as they could, and can say good things about you. I'll speak first from psychology, an area where it's mostly research based. In programs like these, you will want to find supervisors who you've worked with outside of classes. So in some cases, classes are sort of one of the end all be alls of the work. And so really it's going to be professors who you worked closely with in classes, have done work for, and they can speak directly to the work that you contributed. But you really would like that opportunity for outside of classes. At least in psychology, you would want to show that I worked in a lab with this person, and this person has seen my ability to conduct research, to follow protocols, to be a part of the research process. So you'd like to have referees who can speak to as much of you as possible, at least the side of you that you'd really want to show to a graduate program. So be sure to think about referees who might know you the best, especially the best out of all others. These are typically going to be professors. They don't always have to be, and it will specify who they want their references to be from, depending on the program, but it's typically those who hold like a professorship somewhere. And so what you'll want to be sure that you do is to be working with people all throughout your time, say in undergrad, or even especially the last few years like I did myself, so that you can have people who can speak above and beyond what someone who maybe just observed you in a course. And supervisors, ideally, or potential referees, will tell you that I don't know if I'm super confident in the letter that I can write for you, because I'm not certain that I could speak towards all of your qualities or write a strong enough reference letter that you might be interested in. And also, what you should be doing when you contact these potential referees to write your reference letters, you should be providing them as much detail about yourself as you can, because, well, we're all people, and supervisors are people, and they often they don't have perfect memories, say. And so you'll want to provide them with details to even refresh them. You might have worked directly with them on a particular thing, and they may have even forgotten that. And so some documents like a resume, or sort of, hey, we worked on this project together, and sort of sending a short reminder of that. Also providing details about what you're applying to, so they can sort of tailor their reference to be specific to that particular area or that particular program, or even individual if they happen to know the supervisor that you are applying to. And also it's worth mentioning why you're asking them. So remind them that, we've worked closely together. I feel that you can speak towards these sorts of qualities about myself. You can help guide them in the reference letter that they write for you by pointing out qualities that you think you might want spoken about. So be very, very important to pick people who you are working with, especially externally other than a class, and provide them with as much detail about yourself as they're willing to accept to help write the best reference letter that you can take.
Great, thanks, Ethan. I'm going to turn this next slide over to Susan.
Great, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Ethan. So your supervisor. So this is a very important relationship for you as a graduate student. As Anna mentioned earlier on, the supervisor is the individual who will guide you in your program, guide you in your researching and preparing and writing your MRP or your thesis. So it's important to do that work and do that research to identify potential supervisors in the program that you're interested in. So ways to do that is checking again on those program websites under Our People, and there is a list of faculty. So you're looking for someone that's working in your area for the MA program. It's not, it doesn't have to be, specifically that you're both working on the exact same topic, but somebody, in history, if you're doing a project in Canadian history, you would want to look at potential supervisors that work in Canadian history. Another important thing to consider is to check each individual's title. So we all have different titles, sessional lectures. You may have been taught by many sessionals in your undergrad, visiting lecturers, but the supervisor needs to have the qualifications to supervise graduate students. So you're looking for an assistant, associate, or full professor. And look more carefully at the kind of work that the supervisor is doing on their personal websites and on the university websites, so that you can, find a really good match for your research and your personality and the way that you are expecting to engage with the program as well. So how do you find out information about supervisors?
Did I move too soon, Susan?
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. How do you, things to think about when reaching out to a professor? So the best thing to do is to contact professors. I love this. Professors are people too. We're very accessible. We're really interested in working with graduate students. So don't hesitate to contact individuals. We also want you to choose the best programs for you. So even if you're, you reach out to a number of professors, or you're even, looking in other programs, we're still very interested in speaking with you and helping you make the best decision for yourself. So when you reach out with them with an email, make sure you share your research area you're interested in working with them, so that there's a sense of that synergy. Provide some information about yourself and what your goals are. And it's always really useful to include your CV. And even if you have a draft proposal or statement of intent ready, that's useful to have a look at as well. This is important. Again, it's a long-term relationship, especially in the PhD program. We're looking at 4 or 5 years. In the MA program, it's an important relationship. This is the person that will guide you in your research. So take the time, reach out. Some professors may be able to have Zoom calls with you so that you can meet them in person as well. Some programs would like you to suggest possible supervisors on your application form. Some programs, as Ethan had mentioned, in psychology, students are supervised by a number of individuals. In other programs, you may not be admitted unless there is a supervisor that's willing to work with you. So for example, in history, we only admit students who have a supervisor. So this is a key step in terms of trying to identify the best individuals to use to work with you. You can also identify more than one person as well. Some applications will ask for your preferred supervisor and alternate individuals as well. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Susan. Okay, so you've applied. Now what? Most programs, the majority of programs in arts usually has an application deadline of about February 1st. Some are a little bit earlier. Most tend to crowd around February 1st. Some of you will get your applications in really early. Some of you will absolutely hit the deadline, which is totally fine. For timelines, what we do try to do in arts is try to consider applications in a very timely way. So if you have your entire application in, and there's a number of others who have their applications in by the middle of January or near the end of January, it's entirely possible, even if the deadline's not till February 1st, it's entirely possible that the graduate admissions committee for that particular department are already looking at those applications. Our goal is to try to snag all of you who are the best and the brightest, which is of course the goal of all universities, and I assume you'll be applying to more than one. So if you have a really strong application, we want you, and we want to get in touch with you as soon as possible. So ideally, you'll be hearing, if the deadline's February 1st, hopefully you'll be hearing within about a month or so, if you have a strong application, that we would like you and that an offer will go out. By the same token, if we really don't think that your application is very strong at all and that you do not have a likelihood of being accepted, we also want to let you know that sooner rather than later, so that you're not sort of hanging around hoping that this will be something that happens. And then some of you might have good applications, and we'll let you know that for now you will be on a wait list. You've got a good application, there might be a spot, but for now you'll be on a wait list, and we will let you know as soon as possible. But we are hoping that most of you would have a good idea of whether you're in or out by, say, beginning of April near, at the latest. So those are the timelines that we aim to hit. All right, and what if you're one of those students where we'd love to have you and you get in? One thing you will get is an offer letter. So this is a letter that details exactly what we are offering you for coming in. You've, potentially, such as history, you're going to be working with this particular professor. Here is your financial offer. So we will be offering you $18,000 to help you pay for your tuition as part of your graduate studies, but this will mean that you will be a teaching assistant. So that's the other great part about being a graduate student, is that you become a teacher yourself and a mentor, and all of a sudden you're the one that's evaluating papers coming in from the first years and the second year students. Usually your funding package is usually a TA-ship or two as part of that funding. So you're going to want to carefully review that offer letter, look at the financial support that's been offered, and you're going to really want to look at accept or decline by. There's usually a deadline, and we want to snag you as soon as we can. And so be sure that you do that, because if you go beyond that deadline, it's possible your spot is given to another student. So check out when that deadline is. And then if you accept and you're coming, between your acceptance and the time you start in fall 2022, programs like to hear from you. They want to know who you are. They want to, and you'll find that you're actually probably going to get communication too, that the graduate coordinator is going to be emailing you. Maybe Caitlin's going to be emailing you. Maybe there's an event that goes on in the summer that the department hosts in order to welcome you to that department and that program. So you just want to know that we're really excited to have you as part of that program. So those are the things that we'd want you to do between getting in and then arriving in fall 2022. And so with that, we have about 12 or so minutes left in the webinar. I think, Caitlin, I'll stop sharing my screen, because I imagine there might be some questions that attendees have that we're happy to answer if there are specific things that we did not cover, or other questions that you would like to have answered.
Yes, absolutely. So the first question is actually somewhat of a follow-up to something that Ethan was talking about. So I'm going to just share that. It was posted in the Q&A, but the question is, if you're working for a lab, would it be more beneficial to ask for a reference from the principal investigator, in this case, it's a graduate student themselves, rather than the lab supervisor who might not know you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The key to answering that comes with expressing how these letters are typically written. So especially in psychology, where often when you are working in a lab, you are working much more closely with graduate students than the PI, the supervisor. You will almost always, I actually don't know of a case other than this, that you will ask the supervisor, the professor, for the reference, but oftentimes they will write that reference letter in collaboration with their graduate student, or especially if the graduate student is the one who knows you the best, they will ask the graduate student for their impressions of you. So they're typically written together, but you need the sort of weight behind the professor's name to carry you for the letter that you want. You don't want it necessarily just coming from a graduate student. You did the work in the PI's lab. You'd like them to speak about you as much as possible, and they will use the graduate student and their opinions of you to help inform the letter that they write.
Thank you, Ethan. We received some questions that were submitted in advance, so we're going to cover those, but I do want to remind you the Q&A is open, so please feel free to put your questions in there if you'd like as well. And while in the meantime, we'll go through the ones that were pre-submitted. The next question is, how long after the submission of your application can you expect some sort of response? And I'll just float that out there to everybody.
So Caitlin, I can take that one. I think that's sort of goes back to that timeline slide. So hopefully that question might have been answered a little bit, but we're sort of hoping that you will, if you are a strong student, and we know that we definitely want your application, that you'd be hearing within the first, 4 to 6 weeks after the application deadline. And sometimes what happens too is programs will sort of consider in batches. So you get your first batch, you see that, the kinds of students that are in there, or the applicants, the top ones are immediately sent out with an offer. Applications that are not as strong, or the program's sure that the student would not be accepted into the program, those students are told that as well. And as I said, if you're a good applicant but perhaps not as strong, you might hear that you're on a wait list, and you'll wait to be considered again in the next batch of consideration in those applications. But again, the goal is to try to have pretty much most of our new cohorts set by beginning of April to the beginning of May, because you'll have to make decisions too. Do you come? Do you move? All that kind of stuff. So we don't want to keep you waiting for too long.
Thank you, Anna. We did receive a question in advance that said, what does the school look out for in the selection of its students? I do feel that was answered pretty clearly with things so far. If any of the panelists have any extra information that they want to add, I'll just provide the opportunity here. Otherwise, I was going to jump to the next question. Okay, I will do that. So this is more for social development studies, but most social development studies students go into the Bachelor of Social Work, then the Masters of Social Work. What graduate program would complement the BA and SDS if that student did not want to go the social work route?
So in this case, there are a couple of possibilities. Again, I think as Erica noted, you don't necessarily, for some programs, you don't necessarily have to come from that discipline in order to move into that discipline. So I think I'm aware of some students in SDS who went on to apply to the Master of Global Governance program at the Balsillie School. You have a number of students who are very interested in development, migration, all kinds of stuff in that particular program. Others could also be interested in history or political science. So again, this is the kind of, if there seems to be a logical master's, but you're not really sure if you want to make that jump, this is the perfect opportunity for you to talk to your professors in your department to say, I know I don't want social work, but I do want to do graduate studies. What are the best possibilities for me? And then you get, you can sort of take that feedback and that guidance and make your decisions from there.
Thanks, Anna. How do you make connections with supervisors in an online environment? And I'm going to throw that to Erica.
Yeah, this is a really good question, I think, especially since everything's been online for most of the past 2 years. It's been especially difficult. You can't just drop by people's offices anymore necessarily. And so I think this really depends on how far along you are with your relationship to your supervisor. So if this is someone who maybe you haven't asked them to be your supervisor yet, but you're just thinking about it, versus, if you already have that established relationship there, how to kind of connect with them a little bit more. So I think in general, a really good place to start is just by reaching out and asking a supervisor to have a one-on-one. Most people are willing to meet with you on Zoom or something similar, and just kind of talk about any questions you might have. So it's a really good idea, I think, to really establish some points that you want to discuss with a potential or current supervisor. if you haven't reached out to that supervisor yet, or maybe it's not official that they're supervising you, some really good places to start, things you can ask. For example, what are their research interests? What are they working on right now? What kind of research are they doing? Are they maybe working on a particular publication? You can also ask about their style of supervision, how often they meet with students, you know, how they give feedback and things like that. You know, I've worked with professors who will sit down with you in a 2.5 hour long meeting and give you super extensive feedback. And I've also worked with supervisors who have basically a 10-minute conversation with you and say, yep, it's all good, see you later. So, you know, it also depends on how you work and how much you need from a potential supervisor, what kind of supervision style they have. The last thing I will point out, something that might be really useful for a lot of students who are maybe just entering grad school, ask supervisors for some of the student work that they have supervised. When we submit our theses, our master's and PhD theses, we have to upload them to UW Space, which you can access online. So if you have the names or the topics of a particular supervisor, you can actually look up the names of the theses that they have supervised, which might give you an idea of what kind of topics they focus on and what kind of directions you might want to go in with your own research. So I think that's a good place to start, to just kind of get a conversation going with the supervisor. You don't want to just say, hey, do you want to chat, and then not have anything to talk about. So focusing it around some things that will also help you out is a really good way to establish that relationship.
Thank you, Erica. I can see that there's a hand raised with our attendees. For the purpose of this webinar, mics and video have been disabled for attendees, so I'm hoping everyone can please use that Q&A chat function, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered that way. In the meantime, I'm going to move to the next question, which is, it was submitted by a clinical psychology prospective student. And I'm going to direct it to Ethan. How should a student go about selecting a graduate supervisor? Do you have advice on reaching out to them in advance?
So I actually think Erica did a wonderful job addressing these questions as well in her answer. So I'll try to provide just a few additional details so as to not be redundant. So I would say the main question you need to ask yourself when you are wondering who you might want to work with in terms of a graduate supervisor would be, what is it that you want to do? That's not an easy question to answer for many of us. A lot of the times we have this vague idea of something we kind of like, but it will serve you best to try to narrow down as much as you can on what it is that you want to be, say, studying or researching. And then with that in mind, find out who does that sort of work. You might have practical considerations that will help you sort of define your search or give you search parameters. So say, I need to work with someone who's in Canada, or I don't want to leave, say, North America. And then you might say, okay, of the professors in North America, of the researchers, who is doing this work that I'm interested in? And you could go about this in several ways. You can, search on the internet, but I think a fantastic way is actually to talk to professors you might have at least some relationship with here already, who they might suggest that you look up, given what you're interested in. So that would be the first thing I would say. Focus on what it is that you want to do and then see who else does it. And then try to find out as much about them and what it will be like to work with them as possible. Because supervisor fit is an incredibly important part of graduate school. Having a professional relationship, and also oftentimes a somewhat of a personal relationship with your supervisor who's going to be working intensely with you over several years, is very important that they have a style that works with yours. And so do what you can to find out as much information about them as you can. And this includes reaching out and talking to them. A way to do this might be simply emailing them. Recognize that professors are very busy people, and a lot of them want to help, but are also typically buried in emails among other work projects that they have. And so they may not be very quick to respond to you. And it may be the case that 2 weeks later, you send a quick follow-up email just to express that you're still interested. But trying to sort of establish basic contact with them would be the way that I would go about it. It's the way that I went about it when I applied to graduate school, and I consistently recommend this to those looking to apply. It's try to establish some base level of contact. This isn't sending them a large email trying to tell them everything about yourself. This is sending a very short email, asking them if they would have some time to say chat about their work and that you're interested in applying to their graduate program. It can be as simple and as short as that. In fact, it's probably best that you don't send them a sort of essay. If you send them a sort of short little bit that just says, I'd like to obtain more information. Is that possible? That can get you all where you need to be often. And it can usually lead to further contacts, maybe even a sort of online call like this, where you can one-on-one just chat with them and see what they're like. And then also talking to, say, their graduate students. So find out as much information as you can about what the supervisor will be like to determine if that's a good fit for you, if you've already determined that the sort of work that they do is something that you are intrinsically interested in.
Thank you, Ethan. Just paying attention to our time, we did receive a question in the Q&A box, and I'm going to read it here. Has there been a combined university effort to make accommodations given the pandemic for graduate applications? I'm concerned about a lack of opportunity for lab experience and how that will impact graduate applications for this coming year. I'm just going to put that out there to all panelists.
Yeah, I can maybe take a first crack at this one. So I think everyone is very cognizant of the limitations that have been imposed on undergraduate students when it comes to experiences that they would have normally had COVID-19 not been a factor in their university, in their undergraduate university education. So on this sort of thing, I think you're going to end up in a cohort with a whole bunch of applicants who have not had as much in-person lab experience as they want. So really, it kind of levels it out in the first place. But I think my suggestion would be, in your statement of interest, you explain, right? So you would want to say, you know, normally at this point, I would have already been working in a lab under the supervision of whomever, and I've had to do all of this online or at home, or I haven't had yet the opportunity to do it. And you just explain it. I remember when I applied for my PhD in my master's degree, I took a year-long constitutional law course at the law school, 8 months long, 100% exam. It was crazy for me to do that, but I did it because it was helping my research. 100% exam. I ended up with like a B in the course. And when I applied for my PhD, I spent some time explaining the B. There's a reason there's a B, and it's because of this. And that was absolutely accepted by the program. So in this case, I would do the same thing. You just explain, because of COVID, I've not been able to be in the lab, but I'm looking forward to that experience. And I'm, you know, really happy to be working with other graduate students and mentoring undergrad students in this environment. So I think that would be my key piece of advice on that question, and to know that you're not going to be the only one, right? All programs are going to be very cognizant of the limitations that incoming applicants have had over the past 2 years.
Thanks, Anna. We have a couple just last minute questions I want to try to get in that I think would be applicable to a lot of people. So we'll just try to answer them right now. Do you have any insight for students who are unsure about applying to graduate school right after undergrad? In this case, they may want to take some time off to work or just take time off in general. This is a perspective question that I'll just throw out there.
I can definitely speak to this question because I'm, well, as you know, I'm already in my PhD, but in between my bachelor's and master's, as well as between my master's and PhD, I did take a little bit of time off. And so I just want to kind of touch on that for a little bit. And I mean, I think this really depends on you and how you feel and where you're at and what you feel like you're ready for. When I finished my undergrad, I was not 100% sure what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go into grad studies. And one of the things I did was I participated in an exchange program. My field is German studies, and so I wanted to spend some time in Germany, improving my language skills, which is exactly what I did. And that was just very removed from a university academic context, which was a nice break, but also made me realize, hey, I actually do miss that. And so I think I will apply to grad school. And so I think if you're considering taking a break, consider the reasons why you're taking it. For me, it was a really valuable way to find out if grad studies was really what I wanted, or if it was just like a spur of the moment. It's really easy. At the end of my master's, I know I was kind of riding on this high after finishing my thesis of like, wow, what a great feeling grad school is. And I ended up taking 2 years off and worked in between starting my PhD. And that helped me so much, just also in terms of knowing, I know that I want to be here. I'm not here just because I just rode that wave and went straight into it. In the end, it was really good, not only for honestly, for my experience, my perspective. I gained a lot of experience and perspective from my, wasn't really an industry job. I was working at a university, but in a different context. And then knowing when I came back to grad school, this is definitely where I want to be. And I do know that some friends of mine went straight from master's into PhD, and they had a pretty rough time in the beginning because they were a little bit burnt out, and there were maybe some, maybe they just needed some more time for themselves and just to kind of recover a little bit after the really intense work at the end of the master. So consider what's right for you and what makes sense and what your goals are. I think ultimately, if you're concerned about timing and how long it's going to take, I wouldn't even worry about that at all. In the end, an extra year to gain some experience, that's not a lost year by any means. That just adds to what you have and what you can do. So definitely don't be afraid of taking the time off. Just make sure it's for a reason.
That's really great advice. And we'll round out this presentation with one final question. What do you find most students don't know prior to applying or starting graduate school?
I can speak to a little bit of that. There's a lot. I feel like students come in and there's a lot of administrative-ish things, funding things, how do you register for courses, all of that. So all of the kind of management and administration that you need to do. But there's also a lot of support to help you through that. I find that students sometimes don't really know what it's like to write a 50, 60 page MRP or a 100-page thesis until they're starting to do that. But again, it's a really exciting opportunity to delve deeply into your research. And there's, again, lots of supports and guidance around how to go about doing that. And then the other thing I find that is perhaps a bit unexpected is some of those relationships that are developed among students in really interesting ways in my department, for example, reaching out across into other departments and all of the opportunities at Waterloo to engage with different kinds of communities. So it's a really exciting time. As Erica mentioned, it can be, stressful and it's hard work and, it's kind of constant rigor, but there's also this really wonderful time to spend working on that research and developing those kinds of relationships. So yeah, it's constant learning, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are really good points, Susan. I think the one thing I would add too that I find sometimes students don't fully appreciate is that when you're a graduate student, you're not just a student anymore. You also become a teacher. You are leading tutorials. You are grading papers of first-year students. You're providing advice. You're holding office hours. So even that added kind of expectation or responsibility or privilege actually that we extend to graduate students that we have as faculty members, you actually get to sort of impart what you know onto others and guide others. And I think sometimes it just takes the first few months of graduate school as when you become a TA, and it's probably the most nerve-wracking thing you've ever done in your life before, but then you find it's actually one of the most enjoyable pieces of being a graduate student. But I think sometimes students underestimate kind of that you've moved not just to becoming like a different kind of student, but you're also now, you've taken on the role of a teacher too in most of these programs, which can be really richly rewarding for students, at least in my experience.
I think those are awesome points. And I would just like to add one more, which might sound a little counterintuitive. But I found that a lot of students enter the program or apply, and they're not actually sure what they want out of it. So they recognize that they want a degree of sorts, but it's not necessarily clear to them what they want to do with that degree. And graduate school is an investment, and it's a trade-off between the other things that you could be doing with your life for the next several years, say. And if you're not certain what you may want out of that, then you might spend some time thinking about what it is that you do want out of it. Because if you're not sure, then applying to graduate school instead of hoping that you find it along the way is one strategy that you could employ, but it's perhaps not the wisest one to do that. If this is something that you're going to be incredibly passionate about doing and that you can't see yourself doing anything else, then even not being certain exactly what it is that you want to do outside of it, other than just whatever this is, that's fine. But if you're not sort of certain where you want to take this, then you should probably think more about it, because it is quite the commitment to invest yourself into without knowing where it is that you wanted to take you. And that's also not to say that what you enter graduate school with is not what you are necessarily going to be exiting with. So career plans can change, and being in the sort of ecosystem at the time is going to make you very aware of what it is that you may want or not want from that field. And so it's fine to sort of change your mind as more information is presented to you, but have a sense about what it is that you are going to graduate school for, because it is not the end itself. In many cases, it is a very large stepping stone to get to exactly where it is that you want to go, whether it be a professorship or some sort of research in industry, or many of the possible employment opportunities that a degree like this can afford you.
That's really excellent advice. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up. So I'm going to just hand this back to Anna for some final words.
Okay. Well, I think mostly just I want to say thank you for attending the webinar. I hope you've been able to learn something about the application process and about graduate studies in general. In particular, I would like to thank my colleagues who have joined me today to help with the presentation and to answer questions. So Eric, Ethan, Susan, Maha, thank you very much. And very special thank you to Caitlin, who's organized all of this and who does a great job in terms of recruiting some of our best and brightest, of which those of you who have attended are likely in that category. So please reach out with any questions that you might have. And we're looking forward to seeing your applications if that's what you decide to do. Otherwise, have a great rest of December, and we hope you have restful holidays to gear up for January.